And we begin this hour with a warning. President Trump is trying to change the narrative of his brutal, indiscriminate, and deliberately cruel immigration crackdown. He wants to change the narrative, but he can't change the story, the one that we see with our eyes and on video, and the ones brought to us by journalists who are committed to bearing witness. Following sustained public outrage and sliding poll numbers over violent deployments by federal immigration officers in cities like Minneapolis and Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. and Chicago, this administration has signaled a reset. They started in late January. Kristi Noem, then still head of DHS, stepped back a bit. The border czar, Tom Homan, was brought into Minneapolis with a tacit promise to rein in ICE and CBP after officers killed 2 American citizens and the administration lied about the circumstances of their deaths. And this week, Trump made clear what the real problem was with that operation. Because as the Wall Street Journal reports, quote, President Trump is seeking to lower the profile of his mass deportation effort, end quote. The president, the Journal reports, has told advisors that he wants to see more attention on arresting bad guys and less chaos in American cities, according to people familiar with the matter, end quote. The report goes on to note that the change is being driven by Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who believes his immigration team turned one of his marquee issues into a challenge for the midterms, and that the firing of Kristi Noem as DHS secretary is being seen as the moment for a reset. Pay attention to what they're saying here. For the White House, the problem is the optics, what it looks like on TV, how it's talked about, what the headlines and the polls say, and crucially, the reporting on the reset talk at the White House is sourced to, quote, people familiar with the matter, end quote. The official statement to the Journal from the White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson is, quote, nobody's changing the administration's immigration enforcement agenda. President Trump's highest priority has always been the deportation of illegal alien criminals who endanger American communities, end quote. Keep that top of mind, who endanger American communities. The United States Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma, Trump's pick to replace Kristi Noem, brings to the role all the qualifications that you'd expect from someone who spent the last decade fixing pipes and picking physical fights at Senate committee hearings. He's described the revamp this way during his Senate confirmation hearing this week.
My goal in 6 months is that we're not in the lead story every single day.
The goal is to not be the lead story every single day. Again, listen to what's being said. This isn't about retreating from a widely unpopular mass deportation effort. For Trump, the crackdown's become a political liability because we see the violence and the brutality and the cruelty with our own eyes and what reporters show us. Listen to what the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz told my colleague Jacob Soboroff in this exclusive interview in late January, which was essentially confirmed this week by the Journal's reporting.
I talked to the White House. I talked to Tom Homan. I talked to numerous people. And not once did they ever say Alex or Renee's name. Not once did they ask how the people of Minnesota were doing. So, look, I know who I'm dealing with, and I know the reason that he was calling me was he needed something from us. The reason he was calling was his poll numbers dropped and it looked bad on TV. What the White House wants is for these scenes on the streets to stop because it's tanking their approval ratings, and according to the president, it looks bad.
As Malcolm Ferguson noted in the New Republic, quote, even if Trump has finally realized that masked federal agents kicking down doors and killing people in the street is a bad look for the midterms, Stephen Miller is still in the room, end quote. Meanwhile, amid the so-called reset, we learned just this week that a 19-year-old who was arrested after being stopped over a minor traffic infraction died while in ICE custody at a facility in South Florida. He's the youngest person to die in ICE detention during this administration. Royer Perez Jimenez died on Monday of a presumed suicide in his cell, according to a statement from ICE. His official cause of death remains under investigation, but Royer Perez Jimenez is dead after being stopped over a minor traffic infraction. In Minnesota, we saw in a visceral way what enforcement looks like when it was impossible to ignore, particularly after the viral killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. The crackdown became the biggest flashpoint in the debate over Trump's mass deportation agenda. And former Border Patrol Commander-at-Large Greg Bovino's ouster came as a new AP NORC poll found that most U.S. adults say Trump's immigration policies have gone too far. But here's the key. Most of the enforcement was never happening in the flashpoints that drew all that public outrage. New analysis from the New York Times gives us one of the clearest pictures yet of how immigration enforcement is actually unfolding across the country, and it's not what you might think. The bulk of the effort is taking place far more quietly and away from the public view. Here's what the Times found. ICE arrests are surging nationwide, now averaging more than 1,100 arrests a day in 2006. That's nearly double from about 600 a day last spring. But enforcement is uneven, and the busiest areas are not actually the ones making headlines. Miami leads the country, more than 41,000 arrests since Donald Trump took office, followed by Dallas, Atlanta, San Antonio. Most enforcement is actually happening away from the cameras. Cooperation with local law enforcement is key. About half of arrests are custodial, meaning they're arrests of people who are already in custody, and those are much more common in Republican-led states where local police are actually willing to collaborate with the Trump administration. And crucially, many of those arrested have no criminal record, undercutting the claim that this effort is in fact focused on criminals and the worst of the worst. Meanwhile, ICE is operating at a massive scale. More than 7 million people are on its non-detained docket, meaning that they're not in custody, but they are considered deportable. 7 million. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, previous administrations prioritized detaining immigrants with criminal records while releasing most others pending hearings. As of last month, according to Brennan, 74% of those in ICE detention have no criminal record. ICE air operations has rapidly expanded, for example, driven in part by the growth of its subcontracted private charter network, according to Human Rights First's latest report. As that report notes, for the month of February, quote, the findings show a continued escalation of the Trump administration's mass deportation agenda, including 183 removal flights to 31 countries and the continued use of forced third country transfers. In February alone, after the administration's supposed reset, there were 1,630 immigration enforcement flights, a 155% increase from February of last year. Private contractors are really doing well, by the way. ICE awarded CoreCivic, which is a private prison company, a no-bid contract to reopen a 1,033-bed facility in Kansas, later expanded into a deal expected to bring in about $60 million annually. ICE also signed a $1 billion 15-year contract with GEO Group, another major private prison operator, to run a detention facility in New Jersey. 15 years is an unusually long deal. Trump's shift in strategy is about moving this effort out of sight and for the long term, but the machinery has not stopped churning. And as reporting continues to show, enforcement is increasingly reaching into the most vulnerable populations, including pregnant, postpartum, and nursing immigrants. As of February 16th, 121 people in ICE detention fell into those categories, including 9 women who were in their 3rd trimester, despite federal policy stating that such individuals should only be detained in limited circumstances. Between January 2025 and February 16th of 2026, 16 miscarriages were recorded by people in federal custody. And as enforcement expands, another deeply troubling development is getting far less attention than it should be: the surveillance of political dissent. There's growing evidence that federal agents are tracking and documenting American protesters, not immigrants, not undocumented immigrants, American citizens who are protesters, filming them, logging their information with the help of tech companies like Palantir, and ultimately relying on that same data system that powers your phone and your texts and your emails. According to reporting by the Washington Post and the New York Times, and now according to new reporting from NPR, in some cases, it goes further. According to NPR, ICE officers are taking DNA samples from American protesters who they arrest. One protester described being tackled while filming an arrest, detained, and then without warning, having his DNA swabbed. Legal experts warn this could amount to what one attorney calls a catalog of political dissidents. A catalog of political dissidents in America. And that changes the stakes for anyone who does not support this administration, which right now is actually a majority of this country and growing, which is why more than ever this moment demands reporting grounded not in the Beltway, but in the lived experiences of the people who are most affected by these policies.